G'day, Iain Dooley here from the Australian Employment Party. So we've heard the same old phrase today, jobs and growth, jobs and growth, jobs and growth. Getting pretty sick of it myself, given the fact that neither of the leaders have presented anything like a plan that would actually create jobs and growth. We all know that the government sets and chooses the unemployment rate. They do this by allowing the private sector to shed labour and then leaving a buffer stock of unemployed people without work and without any prospect of getting back to work in many cases. The government could well choose to hire these people, keep them trained, keep them employed, keep food on the table for families, keep them able to pay their rent, able to pay their mortgages, but the government chooses to leave them unemployed. If the private sector won't pay more than a socially inclusive minimum wage to hire someone, then it's the government's obligation to do so. And it benefits everyone, not just that person, because it maintains strong demand in the economy, and that is the key to growth. Jobs and growth go hand in hand, and it's the jobs that come first. So we need to make sure that the government is held accountable to maintain its obligation to its citizens to employ anyone who will not be hired by the private sector at a socially inclusive minimum wage. We also heard both leaders talk about their plans for superannuation and helping people retire happily. But they talked a lot about savings and a lot about dollars and a lot about cost and taxes and incentives, but no one's asked the question about what we actually need in terms of resources to take care of people as they grow older in this generation and the next generation of retirees. How many people do we need in the country? How many of each profession do we need? How many aged care facilities do we need? Are the people being trained properly? Are we going to have lots of people with lots of money, but no one to actually provide the services and make the goods that they need? That's what we should be focusing on, because the government is not constrained by the number of dollars, and we can have all the dollars we want in the future. But if the resources aren't there to back it up and actually supply this generation and the future generation of retirees with the care that they need, then we can have as much super as we want, and it's not going to save anyone. So we need to make sure that we're holding our leaders accountable to ask the right questions about how we're going to deliver services to retirees in the future. We also had heard the tired old garb about asylum seekers, both leaders chanting about tough border policies, all the while ignoring the fact that we are not fulfilling our obligations as signatories to the UN Refugee Convention, both continuing the fiction that somehow it's safer to not process asylum seekers and assess people for their refugee status onshore. There is no security risk to processing people onshore, and there is no security advantage to mandatory detention. And I dare you to find one defence force or security or intelligence personnel who's not in the political sphere who challenges me on that. Because I've never heard anyone in the Army or ASIO or the AFP or whatever government agency you might name come out and say that yes, processing people offshore is necessary to maintain the security of Australians. And I doubt they would say that, because then it would just be admitting that they can't do their job. Because all these people work in law enforcement, and law enforcement is what keeps us safe. And that's even assuming that there's a risk posed by accepting people to come in who arrive by boat to Indonesia or any other place. And then there's the humanitarian grounds. Oh, people have died at sea. Those horrible deaths were not the fault of people smugglers, because people smugglers are just doing what the private sector does when a gap is left by the government, when a duty of care is ignored by the government. No, It's not the fault of people smugglers, but it is the fault of Kevin Rudd, and it is the fault of Malcolm Turnbull, and it is the fault of Tony Abbott, and it is the fault of John Howard that those people died at sea. And that's because many of them were genuinely assessed as refugees and desperate to get out of their indefinite detention, their indefinite limbo. They've got on a leaky boat and headed to Australia to force the situation, to try and get a result for their families. Now, wouldn't it just be fairer if we are truly being humanitarians to just send a better boat? Or maybe we could just give them a plane ticket, especially if they've been assessed by the UNHCR in Indonesia as being genuine refugees. It's crazy that we accept the fact that people will make it to Indonesia, be assessed as genuine refugees, and then not grant them refugee status to come into our country and welcome them with open arms to join us here to share in the Australian dream. Mr. Peter Dutton saying that refugees will take Australian jobs. Well, I say, let's give them a job, because the government can afford to. We need the resources. We need the people. We can pay them to work. There's plenty of work to do here. And anyone who wants to come to this country and join us in building a great nation, I say we should welcome them and encourage them and help them to get here safely by any means necessary, instead of cowering behind our borders, feeling safe behind our strong border force and our strong political rhetoric. Let's stop cowering and have the courage to overcome our own sense of xenophobia and our own insular attitudes and welcome people in to make this country as great as it can be. Both leaders had their little bit to say about climate change and how they're acting and the targets and the percentages, but we all know that the action on climate change so far has been woefully inadequate. And the only time we got any real action on climate change was when we had a balance of power held by independents and the Greens, who were not bound by party lines to act against the interests of Australians and the world. There is no way to tackle climate change without a price on carbon. There is no way to tackle climate change without serious research and development and huge investment by the government in clean jobs and clean energy. So what's stopping us? When it came time to fight the global threat of fascism, we rose to the challenge. Did we stop to try and cost it out and figure out how much we might spend during that campaign? No. Fascism was an urgent, real, clear, present threat, and we did whatever it took. Now, since we're sitting around pontificating about percentages and worrying about costings and trying to figure out what everything might cost before we take any action, the only conclusion that we can come to is that neither leader sees climate change as a real, clear and present threat. Because we know that when leaders are faced with a real, clear and present threat, they act quickly, they act decisively, and they don't sit around to squabble about the cost in dollars of a currency that they issue. But if you agree that climate change is a clear and present threat, then we should be pushing our leaders to do whatever it takes, whatever it costs, to bring about a solution. And finally, to the NBN, the woeful NBN, the inadequate NBN, the slow 60th fastest in the world NBN that has set us apart, set us back as a technical backwater, trailing behind even underdeveloped countries, even third world countries with rampant poverty now have faster internet than us. Don't we think of ourselves as technological innovators? Don't we think of ourselves as being inventors? Don't we think of ourselves as being ahead of the times? Back in the mid-1800s, Australia was an early adopter of telegraphy, the state of the art, And it took about 20 years to link up all the capital cities in Australia with a telegraph. 20 years, horses and carts, people swinging hammers, burying the lines across the Nullarbor, 3,200 kilometres, to finish up connecting Perth in 1877. If we could connect up all the major cities with telegraphs in the mid-1800s, are you telling me we can't build a fibre network to replace our ageing, decrepit copper network with all of our advances in productivity, with all of our new smarts in technology, with our superior transport, with our superior road network, our superior planes and trains? We can't do it? Not what will it cost, but do we have the know-how? Are we stupider than we were then? No, we're a smart nation. We have all the skills we need to do this. So we're sitting around arguing about money again. But we have the resources. We have the skills. What's to stop us from mobilizing those? It's the same old tired game. What'll it cost? Everyone's been caught up about arguing over dollars, even though you and I both know that the Australian government creates the dollars. Back in 1858, had someone given us a whole lot of dollars, and that's what allowed us to build the telegraph network? No. We just had people, and the people did the work. And the government's job is to organise those people. And the government organises people with dollars. And that's why dollars exist. Dollars don't exist to be argued over and accounted and put into surplus and have debt arguments and odd accounting tricks that make it look as if we need to borrow our own currency, even though that's a logical impossibility. So of course we could build the NBN. But we're there talking, oh, maybe it's going to cost 50 billion, maybe it's going to cost 34 billion, and the cost blowout. There is no cost blowout. There's no such thing as a cost blowout. All there is the ability to do it or not. So by not building a first-class, world-beating NBN, all we're doing is admitting failure, admitting defeat, admitting that we're a subpar, backwater nation without the skills, resources, and know-how to build a network. And I know that that's not true, and I don't think you believe it's true either. So why are we letting our leaders tell us that it is? I think that what we're seeing on both sides of politics is an incredible lack of leadership. What we're seeing is very nearsighted vision. In fact, almost no vision, no creativity. No one's standing up and saying, hey, I've got a great idea and this is how we can make it work. They're sitting there scoring points off each other, using the same old boring issues that we've been talking about for the last 15 years. Asylum seekers, border protection, NBN, we've had this election before. Why are we having the same election again? Why are we talking about all these issues that are boring administrative problems that should be so boring and administrative that no one should ever even hear about them at all, let alone have them be the defining points of politics in this country? Let's deal with the boring administrative issues and then get on with building an amazing country that is really fun to live in. Let's have the courage to stand up to big business. Let's have the courage to put aside our fears and open our hearts, our minds, and open up our borders and open up the wallets of the government who creates the money when it spends, and open our eyes to the leaders who are lying to us over and over again with the same old tired stories, giving us false choice between dumb and dumber. And let's try and make something of ourselves. Okay, thanks very much.